Okay, I'll admit it, right-wing comedy isn't very funny.
Mr. Potato Head's trans, I'm going to bed.
But liberal comedy isn't very funny either.
It's hard to be liberal, let's be honest. But my family, man, I love my family. My dad's a hardcore Trump supporter. My brother's a cop. And my mom's name is Karen.
So maybe all political comedy is just bad.
This Tuesday, our midterm elections will determine the fate of our democracy, and let's just say, big yikes.
Now, politics and comedy have long been strange bedfellows, but in recent years, things have escalated. Late night shows have gotten even more partisan, with hosts sounding more and more like pundits and activists. On the other side, Fox News has one of the most popular comedic late night shows on the air, and a generation of younger right-leaning comedians have taken to the internet to show the world that Republicans can be funny too. Damn it.
It was the year that I finally came out to all my friends, and it's really hard telling people that you care about something about yourself that you know is gonna push them away. But I couldn't hold it in anymore. I had to let them know that I am a Republican.
Even if sometimes they have to explain their own jokes, like the Babylon Bee did. Which brings us back to the question, does political humor generally suck? Let's find out in this Wisecrack Edition, is right-wing comedy funny? Let's start with something that's always hilarious, definitions. According to philosopher Todd McGowan, comedy occurs when we are surprised by a conjunction of lack and excess. An excessive response to lack, or the emergence of lack occasioned by excess, reveals how every lack is excessive and every excess is lacking. When the coincidence of lack and excess surprises us, this is the comic event. McGowan uses the Black Knight scene from Monty Python's Holy Grail as an example.
'Tis but a scratch.
A scratch? Your arm's off.
No, it isn't.
For McGowan, the more of his body the Black Knight loses, the surer he is of his eventual victory, and the more he taunts his opponent with his own superiority. He thus embodies lack and excess simultaneously. It is this disparate connection that provides the key to grasping the comic. If you want to hear more from McGowan, check out the interview that I did with him earlier this year. We'll drop the link in the description. Now, for philosopher Simon Critchley, humor is produced by a disjunction between the way things are and the way things are represented in the joke, between expectation and actuality. He clarifies this via the incongruity theory of comedy, something he says shows up in people like Kant, Schopenhauer, and Kierkegaard. Now, this is when humor is produced by the experience of a felt incongruity between what we know or expect to be the case and what actually takes place in the joke. Take the famous Andy Kaufman Mighty Mouse sketch. Now, we expect him to sing along, but this expectation is disrupted when he just stands there. After we then expect him to just stand there, he disrupts expectations again by enthusiastically lip syncing one line before returning to his awkward repose. But Kaufman, at least in this instance, wasn't making any political point. Now, one of the first bad boys of comedy was Lenny Bruce, whose penchant for political transgression and social critique put him in the literal slammer more than once. This is incidentally way worse than going to Twitter jail for your bad joke about Elon Musk's bedside table.
Sex is lowest born to have children.
Following Bruce's lead was George Carlin, who transitioned from a suit-adorned chuckle captain to a dope-smoking, long-haired hippie. He also went to jail for transgressive jokes, once again making modern cancellation look like a breeze.
So I find it kind of funny to be hassled for using them when my intention is to free us from hassling people for using them.
Let's check out how Carlin uses his favorite subject, words, to do political comedy.
Smug, well-fed, greedy white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. The CIA. The CIA doesn't kill people anymore, they neutralize someone. Or they depopulate the area. The government doesn't lie, it engages in disinformation. The Pentagon actually refers to and measures nuclear radiation in something they call sunshine units. Israeli murderers are called commandos, Arab commandos are called terrorists. Conservatives refer to the Contra killers as freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight?
Yeah, this clip's great because what you see Carlin doing is using something really straightforward, language, and kind of luring the audience in and using it for a really political purpose. So kind of exposing something excessive contained in the space of language and doing something political. Like you can hear some uncomfortable laughter there. Okay, so were Bruce and Carlin funny? Yeah, of course they were. Now, many have turned them into examples of the comedian philosopher, unafraid to tell the truth even when it ruffles society's feathers, like cocktail lounge frequenting versions of Socrates. And Carlin is especially revered by both the right and left as a model of a comedic truth teller with no regard for PC culture. According to Critchley, these examples represent true humor, as the jokes change the situation, tell us something about who we are and the sort of place we live in, and perhaps indicate to us how it might be changed. And following this, it seems pretty clear that right-wing comedy is absolutely possible in so much as there are several liberal structures deserving of critique, as clearly seen in the HBO series Veep. So what's the difference between Carlin ripping on American culture in the 70s and contemporary comedians taking liberal culture to task? Now, for McGowan, a crucial distinction is that all real comedy has to have an egalitarian spirit that must reveal that the social authority itself is not simply a discursive entity, but necessarily lacking, which means that comedy should be pointing to the emptiness of dominant social authorities, things like governments and religions.
Strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
But according to McGowan, the problem with most comedy is that it hides a secret investment in the wholeness of the authority that it mocks, or in the position excluded from the authority, which means that most comedians remain too enmeshed in dominant social structures to really criticize them. It'd be like Socrates, but if he was too invested in Athenian social structures to push his students to see its flaws. And along with their willingness to be arrested for their comedy, Bruce and Carlin both seemed to embody something of this egalitarian spirit, and that neither showed much investment in any type of social authority. Now, this is the sort of position that could allow them to be critical of both poles of American political culture. And it might seem like this makes it easy to write off right-wing comedy, which often has an explicit investment in authorities like the US government, the free market economy, and Christianity. But this is precisely what Matt Sinkowitz and Nick Marks warn against in their book, That's Not Funny, How the Right Makes Comedy Work for Them. It has a pretty cover, and I want to note, in case you're in the comments, they won't stop talking about Marx. Nick Marks, not Karl Marx, different guy, okay? They argue that dismissing right-wing comedy with any species of "that's not funny" means overlooking the growing influence of conservative comedians, and it encourages a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of contemporary politics and entertainment. So to understand contemporary right-wing comedy, let's check out Fox News' answer to Jimmy Fallon, Greg Gutfeld, who hosts the show Gutfeld. And lest you think this is some off-brand right-wing talk show, know that by late 2021, Gutfeld was drawing in an average viewership of 2.12 million viewers, substantially beating out Stephen Colbert.
Think about it. The only reason vegetarians eat plants is because plants can't run away, and vegetarians are too lazy to eat stuff with legs. But this year, the average turkey will cost you 17% more compared to last year. I should have bought this year's turkey last year. Or next year when I fix my time machine.
At my most charitable, okay, so maybe the lack of turkey available is pointing out the excess of inflation and other economic issues facing the country, thus forcing the viewer to reflect on all the proverbial turkey they too aren't consuming. Or maybe, just maybe, the joke is that eating plants is dumb and un-American.
But would the pilgrims find it absurd to eat a plant-based bird?
It seems like it probably falls into what Critchley describes as the comedy of recognition, which seeks to reinforce consensus and in no way seeks to criticize the established order or change the situation in which we find ourselves. This kind of comedy basically boils down to that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood meme with Leo pointing at the TV. Maybe you're thinking that analyzing a Fox News comedian isn't the best way to gauge the zeitgeist. So, how about we consider a world-famous comedian who sells out arenas, has multiple Netflix specials, and created The Office, Ricky Gervais.
What about this person that isn't a lady? Well, his penis. Her penis, you bigot.
Oh boy. Okay, so here, the joke is on both trans people and those who actively affirm them. and it seems to be at least implicitly affirming existing social and religious authorities. If Carlin used comedy to level critique at things like the American military-industrial complex,
Can't educate our young people, can't get health care to our old people, but we can bomb the out of your country, all right?
Gervais seems to be using comedy to affirm traditional heteronormative culture.
I know the new women, they're great, aren't they? You know the new ones we've been seeing lately, the ones with beards and cocks. They're as good as gold. I love them.
One punches at power, one at the marginalized. Unless you think that we're letting liberal comedians off the hook, it's worth noting that they often fall into the exact same trap of using comedy to affirm and perpetuate their own existing social values.
From now on, I identify as homosexual.
In fact, we did an entire video on this topic. We'll link to it in the description, check it out. But don't be like, why didn't you do this about liberal comedy shows? We did a whole video on it, okay? So if contemporary comedy on both ends of the political spectrum seems to fall short of these philosophical understandings of humor, are there comedians engaging in social and political commentary in a way that's actually funny? Okay, here's an example from British comedian James Acaster, in which he's seemingly riffing on Gervais and Dave Chappelle's culture war comedy.
That's my job. I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm meant to challenge people. If you don't like being challenged, don't watch my shows. What's the matter, guys? Too challenging for you? Oh yeah, because you know it's been long overdue a challenge. The trans community.
Okay, Acaster hits both sides of McGowan's philosophy of comedy. He points out the lack hidden in the excess of contemporary edgy comedy, i.e. there's nothing challenging about these comedians, and then shows the excessive nature of comedians, people like Gervais and Chappelle, making trans jokes. Acaster is showing how those jokes are a form of reactionary humor, which according to Critchley is not laughing at power, but the powerful laughing at the powerless. There's also lots of right-wing comedy these days aimed at snowflake culture. The idea that millennials and Gen Zers in particular are all real fragile and narcissistic.
These guys grew up in a world that's child-proofed and padded. All the dumb ones lived.
So is there a way to joke about this phenomenon that isn't kind of judgmental or mean? Well, let's see comedian Patty Harrison give it a go.
I feel like, I just want to be a more honest person, especially in like today's climate. I feel like I don't think people have the bandwidth for fakeness anymore.
Here, in talking about something that's pretty absurd, her relationship with a GOAT co-star.
Well, Randy didn't have a lot of credits.
She's pointing out the ridiculous excess of certain strands of online culture in which banal human emotions and behaviors are described in clinical terms. Here that's, talking about her emotional bandwidth and her high-level narcissism.
I didn't even take the time to learn the actor's name, which is like, high-spectrum narcissism kind of crap.
It's sort of like the TikTok trend where everyone is actually autistic or has ADHD or anxiety or other things that start with A. Doing this is similar to scholar Mary Douglas's claim that a joke is a play upon form that affords an opportunity for realizing that an accepted pattern has no necessity. Harrison's slightly absurdist comedic style is pointing out that an accepted pattern, young people on the internet using clinical terminology to describe normal behaviors, is unnecessary and or excessive. But let's get back to our original question. Can political comedy, and especially right-wing political comedy, be funny? Well, according to Sienkiewicz and Marx, that might not even be the right question. They write, the waving dismissal of right-wing comedy is essentially an act of attempted sorcery, whereby carefully chosen words are supposed to make real-life problems dissolve in a puff of smoke. In reality, however, this liberal psychological complex only serves to confuse things and obfuscates the diverse ways in which laughter shapes our politics. For these authors, there is a risk in simply defining away right-wing comedy because, like it or not, it exists. Now, this might seem to be in opposition to folks like Critchley and McGowan, who seem to argue that conservative comedy is reactionary, untruth, or inegalitarian. But Sienkiewicz and Marx and these philosophers seem to be saying something similar, and it boils down to how we understand the word conservative. When these philosophers say that conservative comedy is untruth or unfunny or reactionary, they aren't saying that people with right-wing political affiliations are categorically incapable of being humorous. They are, however, saying that when comedians and late night hosts use their platforms to either simply prop up systems and figures already in positions of power, what Thomas Hobbes described as sudden glory laughter, or to call for a return to some type of regressive past, what Sienkiewicz and Marx call paleo comedy, they are missing out on what comedy can and should do. And again, the same goes for contemporary liberal political comedy, where it's become increasingly common to get laughs off jokes about how climate change is real and vaccines are good and Biden is daddy.
If you answer this first question right, I will hand you $500 in cash. Listen carefully. Will any of you just take the COVID vaccine right now? Anybody?
Hell, even historically apolitical comedian John Mulaney ruffled liberal feathers when he gave an SNL monologue that acknowledged that no matter who won the 2020 election, nothing would really change.
Or we might have a new elderly man, but just rest assured, no matter what happens, nothing much will change in the United States. The rich will continue to prosper while the poor languish.
Seriously, that clip feels so awkward. Everyone's laughing, and then he brings up this kind of harsh truth, and everyone's like, because much like many right-wing comedians, lots of liberals don't want authorities and social structure to be criticized for some type of fundamental lack. In the case of the Mulaney joke, that voting might be some kind of a sham. This all makes the question less about whether right-wing or left-wing comedy can be funny, and more about the difference between comedy aiming to conserve existing authority and power structures, and comedy willing to question them. And while this doesn't mean that right-wing comedy doesn't exist, it does mean that often this type of comedy just, well, isn't very funny.
So why is Twitter causing such emotional strife in the government and in the media? Well, they were the junkies, and their drug dealer just got killed.
But what do you all think? Is right-wing comedy capable of being truly transgressive? Are political comedians just telling jokes for people who already agree with them? Let us know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you so much to our patrons for all your support. If you want to support us like them, consider joining our Patreon. There's a link in the description. But as always, thank you everyone so much for your time and attention and your likes and subscriptions, and we'll catch you later.